right there.
Oh, very cool.
Well, good evening and welcome to About the Valley. And my guest is Jen Caissie. Jen's been a guest a number of times. It's one of our favorite guests. We have a great conversation over the next hour. And Jen is running for re-election to the Governor's Council.
Yes.
Every 2 years. That is a tremendous job when you're talking. You've got more towns, cities and towns than the state senator.
We do. In fact, my district consists of 5 senatorial districts.
Wow.
So it's
Oh my God.
it's 65 cities and towns. And if you picture a map of central Massachusetts, I have Townsend and Ashby, all the way down to Bellingham, over to Ware, Warren, and Palmer,
Oh my God.
and up to Athol, and everything in between.
That is a lot of driving.
It sure is.
Wow.
And we've been to every 65 city in town and some numerous times. So
Yeah. I mean, that is a big task.
it is.
I think that by all means should be at least a 4-year, if not a 6-year term.
That is a often said comment that at least 4 years.
Yeah. I mean, sheriff is 6 years.
Sure, I joke with Sheriff Evangelitis. I said, if I knew your term was 6 and Governor's Council was 2 back in 2010,
You could have ran for sheriff.
ran for sheriff, it would have been the first woman sheriff.
But, and
he does a great job.
other county positions are 4 years.
They are. They are.
So, I mean, it doesn't make sense that and the thing is, the Governor's Council is to advise the governor, and the governor's 4 years.
That's right. We are the Governor's Council, 8 members,
Yeah.
and we are the final approval of every lifetime appointed judge, clerk magistrate, Department of Industrial Accident judge, and members of the Massachusetts Parole Board. So we're the final approval. When you think about all those groups, obviously the lifetime appointment of judges in the Commonwealth is the most awesome job and responsibility
Yeah.
of the Governor's Council.
That would be the same part that the Senate plays at the federal level.
Great analogy. We are the equivalent of the United States Senate Judiciary Committee.
Yes, because Massachusetts, of course, has lifetime appointments
Yes.
for all the judges and the clerks. So once they get in there, hey, they can be impeached, and we've had impeached judges in the past, but it's not an easy process.
It's not, and I can't remember an impeachment of a judge in my lifetime, in my adult lifetime anyway. And that's one of the things, Harry, I've been pushing for since I first ran for office. I'd encourage people, go back and look at my website, my literature, 2010. I have been talking about judicial accountability for years and trying to get some momentum. And now I'm hoping with the culture that's out there and the public is tuned in to why we need judicial accountability and to review, some meaningful review of our judges in the Commonwealth.
Right, we're not talking an election. In a lot of states, they elect judges and they have terms. So they have to answer to the people as to what they did as a judge. What you're looking for is a review by, we'll say, the Governor's Council every so many years to review each judge, right?
Yes.
And then decide if they should be reappointed.
And let me give you, there's a system in place. I was just saying it yesterday. We had a confirmation hearing for a a vote on a Department of Industrial Accident judge, DIA judges, workers' comp judges.
Very important position.
Very important to people's lives.
Yes.
And they have to come back for review, reappointment and review through a whole process every 5 years to the Governor's Council.
Oh,
And
they
so
do.
I have made the point at those hearings, and when we take those votes, this is what we should be doing for every judge in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Well, you're doing it for an industrial
That's right.
relations judge. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. It shouldn't be all judges.
Especially judges who can take away, let's not forget what judges can do, lifetime appointed judges.
Oh.
They can take away a person's home,
Yep.
they can take away their children, they can take away their freedom, all in a single decision. And those
Yes.
people should be reviewed every 5 or 6 years and held accountable. And the good judges don't fear those reviews. I speak to judges, I'm in court every day.
And you can have trials if the defendant chooses not to have a jury. The judge makes the final decision.
That's right, a bench trial.
Yeah, and bench trials are not uncommon in Massachusetts.
They're quite common, particularly in the less common in the Superior Court, but very common in the District Court.
Yeah, because they know that a lot of attorneys know they can influence the district judge.
And let's put it at probate and family court. There are no juries.
No.
That's an individual
And they're
deciding
deciding
custody.
your future,
That's right.
whether you're gonna have control of your children,
That's right.
your inheritance, a lot of different things.
What you're gonna pay for spousal support, child
Yeah,
support, what you're
yeah,
gonna receive,
Yeah,
whether it's gonna be enough.
and I'm sure there's a lot of divorced people, and not just men, women too, depending on who's got the bigger income, who aren't too happy with some of the decisions.
No, Massachusetts is a tough state, you know,
Yeah.
if you fall, that happens to be an area that I practice in, and for people who pay child support, there seems to be some problem with the guidelines, or there are new guidelines that just came out, child support guidelines this month. And it seems that if you fall within a certain middle-class income bracket, you really get whacked, and if you fall just outside it on the lower end or the higher end, it doesn't seem equitable with how those guidelines work. But you know, what's important is we should be bringing these folks back in for some type of meaningful review, and I
Yeah.
have been speaking to Republican and Democratic senators, particularly some in this area. They're working on bipartisan legislation. I met with them. I met with some local chiefs of police, because the chiefs of police really want to push this issue, and rightfully so, given what's been going on.
Yeah, because they're the ones that see a lot of this injustice going on.
That's right, every day in court.
Yep.
And that, you know, I know you've probably read about Judge Feely.
I was gonna bring him up in Salem, Massachusetts. And he really fits his name. Feely Good, yeah.
Right.
He lets all the criminals out.
Yeah, do you want to talk about the background in that case for folks who?
Yes, if people aren't familiar with Judge Feely, and, you know, it hasn't got as much press as it should get.
Well, there was a protest up at that court, outside the courthouse, so up in that area, the Essex County area, but a lot of people are talking about it.
But it's not getting as much press as it should, and I think it should get a lot more press, because what he's done is really, it's bad for everyone.
It is. I mean, essentially what happened is there was a defendant who pled guilty to not only possession of heroin, but intent to distribute. That's how much heroin he was arrested with. Pled guilty, and the judge said on the record that because he was selling it to support his family, it was just a cash crime and he wasn't going to send him to jail. And, you know, I was asked about that decision at the council, and the reporters were there. And there was been a bill filed to impeach him, a bill of address. And I was asked about that, and I just thought, at a minimum, how insensitive to those families burying their young children,
Yeah.
sons and daughters. You know, I've attended those wakes. We have 3- and 5-year-old children clinging to their parents' coffins because they've died of drug and opioid overdoses and heroin overdoses. It made me really sick that he would be that insensitive and say that from the bench, and that was a direct quote. That made the newspaper. And quite frankly, Harry, he got it all wrong. It's not the poor addict trying to, you know, shoot up because they need it and they're addicted and they've got that disease. This is somebody selling it. This is a person, and this is why I support mandatory minimums for drug dealers. Fentanyl and heroin, they're no different than if they're walking around with loaded guns killing people.
I think people have to understand, you know, you say, well, the people don't have to buy the drugs. No, what these guys do is they sell it to you cheap to get you hooked. And once they hook you, now they got you, and then the price keeps going up.
And the other thing
And
is,
that's what this guy did.
that's exactly what he did.
He
And
was
some
a
of
distributor.
these people get hooked on because of the painkillers, you know? You
Right.
break a leg, you do this, and there's a lot of that out there, and now we're just kind of catching up to those stories. And look, I'm on the Governor's Council. I'm talking about public safety, mandatory minimums for these drug dealers, mandatory minimums for sex offenders who abuse children. Just like that guy who was about to get out of jail, hundreds of children he molested, and because a psychiatrist said he
I
wasn't a
know.
threat anymore, and then he was arrested, you know?
Yeah.
Charged and arrested again with committing lewd and lascivious acts while incarcerated right before he got out. So,
Yeah.
you know,
He was naked in the bed
yes.
when the nurse came in.
Yeah.
And he did purposely. So don't say he's cured. But I mean, these psychiatrists drive me crazy, because it's not a science that's exact.
Not when you can have a psychiatrist look at one set of facts and reach this,
I
this,
know.
and you have another psychiatrist look at the same exact set of facts and reach a completely different,
And part of the reason
opinion.
that they're giving is because of his age. I think he's in his 70s, I
right,
believe.
that he's not capable of,
Yeah.
being a danger or harm.
Baloney! This guy's capable until he's 100, till he dies.
And that's why we talk about mandatory minimums, and, there's a big push to get rid of them, but I dig in really hard on that public safety issue, and I'm loud and proud about mandatory minimums for those drug dealers, those sex offenders, raping and injuring kids. And I think we need to really differentiate between, okay, mandatory minimums for somebody caught with X, Y, and Z for personal use, and our justice system is set up to make those determinations. But
Right.
on the other hand, you have these bad people, and I know you said that, people choose to use the drugs, and that's true. We can't have a complete abdication of personal responsibility
Right,
either.
but these guys purposely hook them. Like I say, when
Young kids,
young kids,
Right.
when you go out and hand out the drugs for next to nothing, and knowing that once they're hooked, they're gonna have to come
that's
back
it.
and buy
Right,
it.
one time,
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, and that's what distributors do.
that's
They
right.
get them hooked first, then they can keep upping the ante.
An insult to injury in that case with Judge Feely. One of the other reasons which he alluded to after the sentencing as to why he didn't incarcerate the defendant was because he was an illegal. So you talk about, now you have to say to yourself, if it were a citizen, would they have gotten the same preferential treatment? And that, to me, is an activist judge, and that's what's wrong with our system. You don't insert your personal views about immigration into a decision that directly impacts public safety. Who knows if that guy's already sold another, bags of heroin to people?
You mentioned mandatory sentencing. Why did that come about? Because the judges weren't incarcerating when they should. So this legislature said, we gotta make mandatory sentences to get anything done.
I made that exact point at an appellate hearing for the now Chief Justice of the Appeals Court, because he was grilled. I'm the only Republican on the Governor's Council.
I know.
So he's grilled about why mandatory minimums are all wrong by most of my other colleagues. So then it comes to me, and I said, Judge, isn't the alpha, if you will, or the genesis of the whole mandatory minimum structuring, sentencing structure, if you will, is a result of the legislature taking action because judges have given outrageously liberal sentences? That's what begets mandatory minimums, is that
Right.
the legislature acted because judges weren't imposing sentences and the public was outraged.
Exactly.
And that's how democracy is supposed to work.
Right, crime was out of hand, and nothing was being done about it. I know there's a problem on the other end too, if you talk to anybody in the judiciary, the jails don't have a lot of room.
Right?
Well, I mean, that's a problem the legislature has to take up.
That's a social policy issue.
They're gonna expand in West Boylston. And why? Because we need to. I mean, if people are committing crimes, you gotta do something about
Well,
it.
it's particularly violent people. I mean, I'm all about
Yes.
treatment. Let's give people a second chance. I mean, I like to use the analogy, you get a father of two, he's the breadwinner, or a mother of two, dad stays home or mom stays home, they go out with their their guy friends or gal friends for a drink after work, they have 2 or 3 drinks, they get pulled over, they're charged with first offense OUI, no accident, no prior criminal record. In our system, rightfully so, they gotta pay big money if they're gonna plead out, they gotta take a class and do everything they need to do. But, there's a difference between a good person who makes a mistake and a bad person who has 100 plus arrests on their record, like the guy down the Cape who
Yeah.
was let out
I
and he
know.
shot and killed Officer Gannon, shot him
Yeah.
in the head when he was trying to effect an arrest on a probation violation. Now, that guy should have been in jail.
If he hadn't been on probation, he wouldn't have to go down there to get him on a probation violation. He would have still been in jail.
That's right.
And what's he doing with a gun if he's out on probation?
That's right.
I mean, these are things that, you go, well, we're gonna pass more gun laws. No, you gotta enforce the ones we got.
Another example, Officer Tarantino in Auburn. I live in Oxford, and
Yes.
I just went to a dedication for a bridge that the Commonwealth dedicated in his honor, and his family was there, and
Yeah,
gave his
that
wife.
wasn't illegal, wasn't it?
No, he wasn't illegal, but I gave his wife a big hug. But he had a rap sheet like you wouldn't believe. He had violated his probation, and there was a judge who let him walk out of Central District Court right in Worcester on personal recognizance after being on probation for a crime, violating probation. He let him walk out, and he shot and killed Officer Tarantino that night in a routine traffic stop in Auburn. And you have to think about, for every decision there is a consequence. So even if the judge said, "I'm setting your bail at 5,000," it would have held him probably overnight. Their paths would have never intersected, and that cop would be alive today. Officer Tarantino would be alive today. And that's why these decisions are literally life and death sometimes.
Well, not only that, a lot of these guys, they commit a crime of murder, and we talk about, well, we have no death penalty in Massachusetts, but we'll lock them up for life. They don't get locked up for life.
No.
The cop that got shot back in the 1970s in Shrewsbury, his guy's up for probation.
Yes.
Bowser. Bowser. They want to let him out. He said, well, I'm reformed now. Well, I don't care. You should have thought of that before you pulled the trigger. We got to set the example.
Well, Dominic Sinelli.
Yes.
He shot and killed Officer John Jack McGuire the day after Christmas. I want to say it was in 2012 or 13. It was about 5 years ago. And here's a system. That was when Governor Patrick, Deval Patrick was our governor. I compared that fiasco to the Willie Horton situation because there were so many, because we were very privy, the Governor's Council, to all the information, everything that went wrong, systematic breakdown, failure. I compared it to the Willie Horton situation, and it was so remarkable to me, the number of missteps. He had violated his probation. They weren't keeping track of him. He's a guy who never should have been out of jail. They referred to, I watched his parole board hearing, referred to his conduct in jail. He had a terrible track record in jail, but they didn't have the correct records. They forgot to put the victim on notice. They forgot to contact the police department that would have come and testified against him. So, these are, and we vote on the parole board members, and I can tell you this, I absolutely grilled every new member of the Massachusetts Parole Board when I first took my seat on the Governor's Council, and I was a hawk about public safety. I was a tie-breaking vote to put a victim's rights advocate on the parole board, which I think is most appropriate. It was a 5-4 vote, and you say 5-4.
We tend to forget the victims.
That's right, and that's what's sad, because they get victimized twice in the process.
You worry about the murderer, you give him all kinds of appeals, and for the rest of his life he's doing appeals and trying to get out of jail, and we can't execute him or anything like that. But yet the victim, what has been done for the victim? They get no compensation, nothing.
And they have to endure the pain of that event, whether it's the loss of a child, a loved one, this horrific event. They have to endure it for years while the appeal process plays through, and it's terrible. And you talk about capital punishment. I support capital punishment for cop killers and anybody who murders children. And we had capital punishment in this Commonwealth. And you know who took it away from the people? The Massachusetts Supreme Court ruled in the mid-'70s that it was cruel and abusive, and it was unconstitutional. And that really, as a constitutional person who believes in the Constitution, happened to study it a little bit in law school and write about it, that really bothers me, that they took it away from the people.
I believe that you have to have good, solid evidence to convict, that it should be a real tough conviction if you're going to get the death penalty, but it should be there. I mean, I'm concerned that someone gets convicted that didn't commit the crime. And we've had that set up. It was set up with those guys that got released, that the FBI put them in jail.
FBI set them up, right.
Yeah. And one of them died in jail.
That was the biggest settlement the federal government has ever paid out to those poor guys. And you know what's interesting about that? Not to go too far off track. You know who was the head of the FBI in the Boston unit at the time who would write letters to the parole board asking that these 3 innocent men never be let out, even when the FBI knew that they were innocent and been framed? You know who was doing that?
Yeah, he's currently doing these special investigations.
His name is Robert Mueller.
Robert Mueller, yep.
Mr. Squeaky Clean.
Yeah.
And Michael Albano, who used to be on the Governor's Council with me, was on the Massachusetts Parole Board at the time. He specifically remembers those letters from Robert Mueller, and now they can't find the letters.
Isn't that convenient?
I mean, it's unbelievable.
Not only that, he also, when they tried to get them out, said this shouldn't be happening.
That's right. He would send letters into the parole board every time they would come up for parole,
Yes.
saying they should be denied parole, even though they knew that those guys were innocent,
Totally innocent.
absolutely framed and innocent.
Yep. Because they were protecting their own informants.
That's right. Yeah, but I mean, you talk about a death penalty case. Everything has to be, it has to be the right crime, okay?
Yep.
And I'm talking murdering innocent children. I'm talking having such disregard for, civil society and your fellow man and the rule of law that you shoot and kill a police officer. And, in this day and age, the DNA, the science,
Well,
and
that's the
it's
thing.
just, we're at a different point now
Yeah,
where it's
we
really
can-
hard to get it wrong.
Yeah, you can get a good conviction now, especially with DNA.
They're solving cases that are 30 years old with DNA.
Yes. And, and you hear about, a lot of these guys, they're repeat offenders too.
That's right. You're not just waking up and murdering somebody. You're not just waking up and finding yourself facing 10 to life in Superior Court because this is your first shtick. I mean, these are people who have worked their way up the district court system,
Yep.
and the district court doesn't have jurisdiction once you're looking at state prison time, and that's what you're dealing with in Superior Court. And the breaks for people at that point. I mean, that's where the courts need to be tough.
Yes. And for some reason, the judges just don't want to do it. Not all judges, but in a lot of cases. I mean, you go back in history, I mean, they used to have what we call hanging judges. Judge Roy, not Roy Bean, he wasn't even a judge, but there was a judge in Arkansas, I can't think of his name right now, who would hang you for stealing.
Oh, well, that's a little rough.
He was tough,
Yeah,
because he
yeah.
said, that's the only way I'm gonna bring law and order to this territory.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's a little,
But I'm saying that,
Southern justice might be a little too much
Right.
for me as a public safety guru,
Right.
in Massachusetts, but
but the thing is, today, we look, well, they're really not bad people, they had a rough bringing up, you always hear the things like, oh, he was gonna get a record contract, or he was good to his mother. Well, I don't care, you committed a crime.
yeah, and I'm a special prosecutor. I'm an attorney in private practice. I own my own business. I've been doing that for 20 years, but I'm also a special prosecutor for the district attorney's office. And, I have prosecuted rape of children cases in Superior Court, and that, the mitigating factors, and my colleague, Attorney Mike Caplet, he just had a rape case in Superior Court. The mitigating factors are, the defendant was molested, and this happened, and this happened. And while you take it into consideration as a prosecutor, at the end of the day, you say to yourself, what about this poor victim, and when does this cycle end?
They're destroyed for life.
That's right, and they are. They really are.
Yeah.
And, I've worked with victims in some of the most
Go and see them 10,
awful
20,
cases.
20 years later, they're still affected.
Oh, for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
And this young boy, who was the victim in a case that my colleague just prosecuted, this will be with him forever. It started when he was very young. It went on for years, and
That's the other part too, is a lot of times it's repeated over and over and over. Goes on for years.
and it's so prevalent. I don't think people realize how many sex offender crimes are committed, family to family, friends on family. I remember the case I prosecuted, the cases. Oftentimes it would take us 3 days to pick a jury because, some of the questions would be, have you ever been the victim? Do you have strong feelings about this? And I'll tell you right now, from my
And you ran into jurors that were victims.
victims, and people say that they have very strong feelings about it, and that should send a message to people in the legislature that, look, this is something that the public takes very seriously, and they want to see people punished when they hurt and abuse children, sexually abuse children. It's something that that's why there are harsh sentences for those crimes.
I can't understand how these people can't realize that there's gotta be something wrong. The offenders don't feel they do anything wrong.
A lot of them are sociopaths. They can justify it in their mind. It happened to
Yeah.
me. But the judges need to. There are a lot of good judges. Don't get me wrong, but one of the questions I always ask nominees when we have our confirmation hearings is, what is paramount to you as a judge? Superior Court judge, district court judge. What is paramount? And sometimes you get these really wishy-washy answers, and if I'm not satisfied, I'll vote no. I mean, I say no. I've said no more to Governor Baker than some of my Democratic colleagues have, because I'm not a rubber stamp. I ran against that in 2010. I certainly said no to Governor Patrick a number of times. And it's funny because when I got elected in 2010, there hadn't been a single nominee out of hundreds of nominees to the parole board, judgeships, DIA, not a single nominee voted down by the governor's council in 5 years in 2010. Since then, there have been about 12 or 15 nominees voted down, either voted down or their nominations withdrawn because the administrations haven't had support. They'll poll the council and they'll pull
Right.
it. And we've had probably 10 or 15 ties on nominee votes. And it was interesting under Governor Patrick, when Lieutenant Governor Murray resigned, what happens is in the event of a tie, the lieutenant governor can become a voting member of the council
Right.
to break the tie. So
Yes.
alas, the 5-4 vote on the victim's rights advocate. But without a lieutenant governor, a tie vote loses. And Governor Patrick was running into that a lot. So that made it really, I was so proud of what some of the quality of the nominees that we were able to insist on towards the tail end of the Patrick administration after Lieutenant Governor Murray resigned. Not that they weren't putting some quality people up, I'm not suggesting
Right.
that. And, so I just think I'm proud of those statistics, because it means that, well, I'll speak for myself, I can't do it all myself, but sometimes you can make good points and everybody just has to go a certain way.
Yeah, and then you convince the others.
Because it's out there.
Yes.
And I've got, I've got some good people I work with on the council, no doubt.
Well, I don't think people know how you get nominated for a judgeship. And one of the starting points is a good donation to the campaign.
That is a criticism. That is a
Well,
criticism.
we know that happens.
It does happen. I mean,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, we have a question on it. We have our own questionnaire. So we get voluminous stacks of paper on these nominees. I mean, we get applications. We know everything about their tax filings, their employment history, their educational history, their passions, their philosophies, their hobbies, everything. But we also have a questionnaire. And one of the questions is, and I actually expanded the number of years, have you or your spouse or anybody in your law firm donated to a politician basically in the last 3 years? And if so, to whom and how much? So they have to list it. And there are times, they are rare, I will say that, where you actually see a nominee has listed none. And I always like to, when I see that, it jumps out at me. I'm happy
Right.
to see that.
Yes.
And so I read the question, I read their answer, and it's none. And at the confirmation hearing, I jokingly say, well, how did you get here? If the answer is none, to your point.
Yeah, no, it's true. But I mean, that's the state of politics. It's been going on since we've been a state. But I know that there are a lot of appointments. It's not a bad job either.
No,
being
in
a
fact,
judge.
their last pay raise goes into effect July 1st. They will be up at $180,000 a year.
Not a bad paycheck.
Not a bad paycheck.
And, you get good vacation time.
6 weeks,
6 weeks vacation.
personal time, sick time.
Yep, personal and sick time. And on top of that, you retire, you have mandatory retirement now
Age 70.
at age
And
70.
And that's another thing. They're recalling some of these judges at age 70, and
Because they don't have enough judges.
well, they do. I think there's a lot of politics behind that.
Uh-huh.
And I'm very disappointed with that. I don't think it's constitutional. The Constitution says you have to retire, mandatory retirement age at 70. It doesn't say you can retire and come back. And
Well, how can they do that? That's a violation of the Constitution.
I wish somebody would challenge that. I really do. I wish somebody would challenge it. Somebody who either was found guilty by a judge who's on recall or not happy with a decision. I wish they would challenge the constitutionality of that judge sitting.
Yeah, unfortunately, if the judiciary would challenge it, are the ones that,
They won't challenge it, but
they won't, but you could have an outside attorney challenge it,
you could. And the Officer Tarantino case? That judge was on recall.
really.
And so I think that there's a reason why you have a mandatory age of 70, because some of these people have been on the bench for 20 years and they're burnt out
Right.
and they don't make good decisions.
I mean, they get a good retirement pay.
So when they come back, they get their retirement pay plus per
Yeah.
diem.
Now, they can collect their retirement even while
Yes.
oh my God.
So, yeah, it's a very flawed, we have a big problem with it. Counselor Bob Jubenville and myself, we've talked about it, we've raised the issue, the constitutionality of it, and we still talk about it, and we want answers, but we're told there's a Supreme Judicial Court decision which would not trump the Constitution, the Massachusetts Constitution, that allows them to do this, but I have a big problem with it.
If you're retired state rep, and you decide to run again, you have to give retirement.
To run for reelection, right?
Yeah, yeah. So if you're appointed to any job, if you work for Mass Highway and you retire and then come back, even in another position, you have to give up your retirement.
I
You
know.
can't collect, town managers, there are town managers that will come back as temporaries to fill a slot while they're filling the vacancy. And they have to give up their retirement.
Now, if you have a judge, and I've seen this, where a judge might retire early. So let's say they get off the bench at 60, okay, and then they do whatever they're going to do for a couple of years, and they're 62, and say, you know what, if they'll have me and they need me, I'll come back. I don't have a problem with that. But when you're 70, and the
Well, if
Constitution
the
says
Constitution
70,
states 70,
that's right.
and you come back, then you are violating the Constitution.
That's what I and other attorneys on the council think.
That shows you why have the Constitution if you're not going to follow it.
And that's, you know, I talk about the Constitution and due process and civil liberties and,
Yeah.
you know, whether it's the Second Amendment rights or First Amendment rights, take your amendment, whatever amendment is important to you, the right to assemble, you know, first,
Yeah.
freedom of speech, your Second Amendment, you know, they're all important, and I talk about that stuff when I vet these nominees, it's important.
We got a phone call here. Go ahead, caller, you're on. Wait a minute, let me hit the speaker again, it didn't work. Try it now.
Hi, Harry. Hi, Jen. How you doing?
Hi.
Okay, hi, Abby.
I always enjoy when you're on, Jen. It makes me feel like there's hope.
Thank you, thank
And
you.
I just want to thank you for being in there and fighting for let's say the little guy. And it's nice to see that we have people who actually believe that the victims should have as much rights, if not more, than the perpetrators. And that really, you know, as you well know, that doesn't work that way all the time. So, and I know it's not an easy job, but I just want to say thank you for your efforts. They don't go unappreciated, believe me. So, hang in there, and if you run for a higher office, all the way to the top, you got to vote.
Well, thank you very much.
All righty, have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby.
You know, it's, he talks about victims' rights. And back in 1997, I dedicated my law thesis to what was then pending a constitutional amendment to the United States Constitution, a Victims' Rights Amendment. And it was sponsored by Dianne Feinstein, who's pretty liberal from
Yeah.
California, and
Yeah.
John Kyle, who was a pretty conservative senator from Arizona. And what it would have done, he talks about victims' rights and how they don't have rights. It would have created a United States constitutional amendment that would have provided for rights for victims, just like criminal defendants have rights in our United States Constitution.
Oh, so,
And it would have given them the right to be present during trials, right to a speedy trial, and just comparable rights to criminal
Right.
defendants. And I really thought it had a great chance of passing, and I wrote all about it. And during my research and writing, it was actually published both in the U.S. and in Europe. I made the Journal of Criminal and Civil Confinement at my law school. I was real proud of that. And the title was Passing the Victims' Rights Amendment, a Nation's March Towards a More Perfect Union. During that research, I read about the most horrific crimes committed against innocent people, and in some cases, the families were not even allowed to sit in the courtroom because a judge had ruled that their mere presence prejudiced the
could
defendant.
influence the jury.
That's right.
Yeah, see, that is totally wrong. They committed a crime. You're there to prove they committed the crime. Them people sitting there should have nothing to do with it.
That's right. They have a right to be present,
Yep.
and just the thought of having to sit through those trials and listen to what happened to a loved one is something I can't even imagine, and to be removed from a courthouse, the courtroom, and denied that sense of closure is
Right,
just,
well, what the judge is saying there is, I don't want them in here because they're going to have influenced my final decision on what the penalty will be.
the jury. They don't want the jury to see the
Yeah.
victim or the victim's family
Yeah, because-
reacting.
Because sometimes the jury sets the penalty too.
That's right. If it's capital punishment,
Yeah.
they would
So
decide
they don't
that.
want them to influence them. Well, I'm sorry, you committed the crime. That's what gets me. These people commit the crime. You know, if someone's breaking into your house and you happen to shoot them, I'm sorry, you're in my house.
I know, you better get your own lawyer, because you're
Yeah.
gonna be, you could be charged criminally.
Oh, I
The
remember when
homeowner.
Mike Dukakis was governor, he says, if someone's breaking in your house, it's your job to run out the door,
Right, run away.
run away. Like, come on.
So much for your house is your
This is
castle,
not,
right?
this is not what we founded this country on.
No.
And yet, that was the feeling, that's a very strong feeling with liberals.
Yeah, and I think it's so misplaced, because if you think about the whole criminal justice system, I mean, we have a system of laws to keep people safe, to keep ordered civil society. People know what the rules are. We're supposed to follow the rules. And at the end of the day, it should be every elected official, public servant's duty, judge, parole board, to make sure that the public is safe. It's to protect the innocent public.
Yes.
That's your job at the end of the day. Police know that. They know that.
Right.
And, you know, they've got targets on their back these days, and it's really heartbreaking to hear about shootings. You know, and I'll tell you, I'll give you an example. That sheriff who was shot and killed in Maryland, the woman, first
1 year on a
sheriff,
job, I guess. wasn't it?
yeah, first female killed, I think, in I want to say 80 years in that community, and police officer. And these three thugs, they just shot her. She showed up, and there was some call in, there was some ruckus disturbing the peace.
Well, it was a suspicious vehicle.
Right, and so she shows up, and they just shoot her. They shoot her dead, and there was she didn't draw a weapon. There was, you know, none of that. And under Massachusetts, I mean, everybody's talking about criminal justice reform. Under the Massachusetts Criminal Justice Reform Act, those three thugs would be treated as juveniles, because they were 17 years old
See,
when
that's
they
another
shot
thing.
and killed her.
Look, if you're 17 years old, you can go in the military with your parents' signature.
That's right.
So that's baloney. But the thing is that if you commit a crime like that, I don't care if you're 10 years old, you should know by then that you're committing a murder here. It's like
17 years old, I mean, you're an adult.
Yeah, you are. You're considered an adult in many ways.
But we have to coddle, I guess, in Massachusetts, so now you're not considered an adult for purposes of criminal activity.
Yeah.
You're treated as a juvenile.
I mean, that's the problem. And they know that, and they know you can get away with it. You know, actually, you know, there are juveniles that act a lot older than what they are, 14 and 15-year-olds, and knowing that if I get caught, nothing's going to happen to me. We really don't have much of a system of lockup for juveniles any longer.
No, we don't, and we don't, you know, the other thing is we shut all our mental health facilities down. We don't have a
Yes.
place to send people who need mental health treatment, and I think if we focused on that in a lot of ways, treatment is very important for drug addicts. Of course, we need those facilities. We've got to try to get these people better. But when you talk about mental health, that's one of the most prevalent issues of our time, and we don't have those facilities anymore. I think
I
it's a shame.
remember quite well in the early 70s when that was the trend to close all the institutions
Big mistake.
and let them out. And prior to that, we never heard of homeless issues. It was after that the homeless issue became a big deal, because a lot of these people aren't mentally capable of living anywhere but being homeless unless they're institutionalized. And I hate to say it, but a lot of those people were there because that's all they were capable of doing.
And some people just needed the day services and maybe some counseling, and, you know, I think it's a shame. I think that's something that we should be talking about from a, you know, social policy issue standpoint, is the mental health facilities, because I think we could do a lot to help people if we focus some resources there.
I mean, we can do it on a private basis, coordination. You don't have to have a big gigantic hospital like we used to have with the state hospitals. I think we still got a couple of them. I think there's one in Munson still active. I'm not sure. It was anyway a few years ago. I don't know if they've been gradually phasing them out. But there are hospitals that handle it too. But it's a cost factor.
It's expensive, but, you know, when we have these hearings, that comes up. What will you do if you are confirmed to be a judge? What alternative things would you do? How would you be creative to make sure that this person gets services that they need versus straight incarceration? And you might have situations where somebody has no prior record and there is a legitimate mental health issue. And I think if you had those facilities available, which we don't, there might be other options. And yes, it costs money. And, you know, there are people on the, on certain political persuasions, if you will, who want to say it costs $60,000 a year to incarcerate somebody. And these numbers are, I leave statistics to fools, okay? But, you say to yourself, well, as a society, is that something I want to pay to keep Jeffrey Dahmer in jail? Ask Officer Gannon's family. Is that
Right.
something that they would have paid to keep their son alive? Ask Officer
Yeah.
Tarantino's family. And there are some things that the public will pay for.
But there's ways to compensate for it too. I don't know if you know what's going on in Concord at the,
No.
they now have a restaurant. And you can go in there as individuals and get a meal for $3.20, I think it is. And the prisoners make the meal. Now, that's a little low on price,
Right.
but you could increase that and open up.
Well, how good is the food?
I don't know, I mean, I know Valley Tech has a restaurant, it's outstanding.
Oh,
They
I
do
know
a great-
Bay Path does as well. Over
Yeah,
on
they
the-
do a great job.
Yes.
And the prices are very low.
No, they do a great job.
But I'm saying that's one example. There's other things they could do. I mean, there was a time when we didn't even have license plates made in prison anymore. I guess it's an outside company does it.
Wow.
So,
Well, but there are things that they could do to offset the cost.
Yeah.
Some minimal monthly fee if there's an ability to pay.
There are states that do it. Louisiana, they have to raise all their own food. They have huge farms.
And I think that's a great life skill for some of those.
Yeah, and it gives them,
people.
some of these, it gives them skills when they go back out. A great example is what Lou Bernazzi guy.
Lou Evangelitis?
Lou Evangelitis, talking about going way back. Lou Evangelitis has a great program, but he didn't start it, of course, it's been going on for a number of years, where
Right.
they have the release program, that helps the towns out, these prisoners come out and they painted the studio here.
That's fantastic. I was a selectman in Oxford for 10 years. I remember the crews coming out. It's been an ongoing tradition
Yeah.
in the sheriff's department. Sheriff Evangelitis has carried it on and I think really perfected it. He does a remarkable job. But that saves communities thousands upon
Yeah,
thousands
and
of
these
dollars.
guys love it, the guys that are in
They
there.
get out, they're learning a
They get
skill.
out, they're getting to do something, it's not boring, and they get a skill out of it.
I think it teaches them self-respect to go out and work hard and
Yes.
see the fruit of your labor, and they feel like they've accomplished something.
Right.
And some of these folks have never had that sense, either because they were never brought up, they didn't have a mother or father, they weren't loved, they didn't have guidance, and
I
it's
know
an important program.
there's some prisons that they make furniture and different things, and they're able to sell it. And what they should do is, they give the prisoners some of the money, but also take some of the money back into the system to help pay for their incarceration.
It's funny, a lot of the people who talk about criminal justice reform and the cost of incarceration and what have you, a lot of them have never stepped foot in a penal institution.
Right,
I have.
yes.
A number of them. And, I think that some of these people who profess this should get out to some of these facilities and see what's going on as far as treatment, counseling, these work programs, and those other types of life skills that are being, offered.
You actually they've got some great TV programming on it, on some of the cable channels, where they take you into institutions and show you what's going on. And you see that's a tough job, prison guard.
One of the toughest.
Yeah.
It's
I
a
mean,
very depressing job.
God, I just can't imagine how anybody does that.
My brother Russell retired recently. He was a CO in Connecticut for 20 plus years. And he's a tall man,
Yeah.
and he's a lovely man. And he won't watch the show because he lives in Charlton, because he'd kill me for referring to him as a lovely man. He's about 6'3", and he did the job every day, and he would just go in, and I talked about it in front of a graduating class for Sheriff Evangelitis. My brother helped me with the speech I delivered at their graduation, and it was all about the respect of the inmates and showing them respect, and they would show you respect. And he had garnered so much respect that they had a riot, and there were people who were killed in the prison, and the top brass picked 2 guys to go in who they knew that the prisoners wouldn't touch and could go in and come out. My brother was one of those. And they went in and they took the bodies out and were not touched, was just that respected. And it is a tough job, and I saw how hard it was for him some days to just go to work, but he went in and he was great at his job. I think the inmates called him Russell the Love Muscle, because he would bring them books to read, and, but, you know, he shared some of how, you know, his experiences.
Well, that's the other thing too. I mean, if you're guides, you can't look at them as being animals either. They're still human beings. And you treat people with respect, you'll get respect back.
Yeah, he was in a medium security, so, yeah,
Well,
that's
a
what he
little
always,
easier, too.
that's what he always tried to do. And, you know, just to bring it back to the judges, you know, some people need a break, but by the same token, some people need a taste of what incarceration is. And a
Yes.
lot of people never go back. You know, once they get sentenced to, you know,
Yep.
they get that 30 days to serve, and it's a short sentence. Maybe they've been on a run, they had an OUI, they had a domestic, but otherwise no prior. They do that 30 days, they never go back.
Yeah, I have a friend that got an OUI and went to Rutland, and he looked around and he said, "I don't belong here." He hasn't drank since. I mean, he doesn't drink when he's not driving. He doesn't drink at all. He says,
Sometimes it's
yeah,
that one,
"I don't belong here. This is not what I want." And that's what woke him up. But prior to that, he was drinking heavy and driving all the time.
yeah, I've had clients who, young adults, and a judge would sentence them against my request to, you know, a weekend in jail. And they come back on Monday, and, you know, I never hear from that family again, other than, you know, Johnny or Susie went to school, they finished college, or they're going in the military, and sometimes it's, you know, sometimes
Yeah.
that, I think we've lost that in our criminal justice system, is tough love.
Yes.
We coddle to a point where there's a total abdication of personal responsibility, and I don't think that's the right message for young adults. If you're gonna take an action, you need to take responsibility, own it, take the consequences, and move on and learn from it.
Have trial attorneys been, you're a trial attorney
I
anyway,
am.
so, in a way I'm asking you, but have they been part of the problem too, where they've made it that everything's an appeal today?
Most people, interestingly enough, most people can't afford an appeal. So even though there's a perception out there, I think what we see with a lot of the death penalty cases, that's what you read about, that's what infuriates you. Somebody's been on death penalty on the death row for two decades. Appeal after an appeal after an appeal. But what I see is you do have appeals, but they're infrequent. And sometimes if you have a public defender, you know, they'll take it up on an appeal. I think more often than if you have a private pay. Appeals are very expensive.
Right.
And, you know, I think more
Yeah,
so it's
you're
the
talking a lot of work.
public defenders who tend to take up more appeals. Or, you know, if it's a private pay person, they might if they have substantial assets. But they're not as prevalent as I think people believe. You see a lot more appeals in civil cases, big money civil cases or custody cases in the probate and family court.
Yeah, well, of course, in a lawsuit, you want to appeal because you don't want to pay out the big bucks. You
Right,
know?
you know, if you appeal, and you can delay for 5 years,
Right.
but you're gonna get whacked with the interest at the end, so you better prevail.
Yes. But you're hoping to get one judge that's going to change his mind somewhere along the line.
Yeah, just, you know, on that panel of 3 at the appeals court, maybe you get
Yep.
2 people to go your way, and you
Yeah.
can, and even if they overturn and remand, you know, oftentimes they'll bring parties to the table, which is important too,
Yep.
because we talk about our justice system, meaning civil and criminal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have such incredible delays, it's very unfortunate, and people, you know, justice delayed is justice denied. And we
Yes.
really need to work on fast-tracking civil cases. Your civil case shouldn't take 5 years to go through the Superior Court, with the Superior Court, or wherever your Superior Court is in this Commonwealth.
Is it the
And
backlog?
just delays and continuances, and,
By
you
the
know,
attorneys involved?
attorneys, sometimes the parties, you know, things happen, vacations, you know,
Right.
there are medical emergencies, that kind of stuff, but, you know, we should really work on fast-tracking some of those cases. I think it would help the whole system.
Now, what about the prosecutors? Do they tend to give in a lot of stuff just to get a conviction? You know, step down on what what the crime is, or?
Yes and no. I think that, you know, assistant district attorneys are just like anybody else. Some of them take the path of least resistance. Some of them work really, really hard. Some are better than others. I think what you find, I mean, speaking from my own experiences, you know, there are cases where you might feel that the police have maybe overcharged, or they'll bring 10 charges when really 5 would have probably
Well,
been,
the police tend to do that to make sure they get a conviction,
to make
right?
sure they get something. Like, for
Yeah.
example, somebody gets stopped for OUI, you always see a negligent operation along with the OUI, just in case, the judge finds them not guilty on the OUI, you hope to hook them on the
Go back on
neg-op, or you
something
quaff the neg-op, or,
Yeah.
you get something. So, sometimes charges are broken down, and, but I think, I think that most ADAs try to get it right, to try to be fair to the defendant if they feel that they've been overcharged, and come up with a reasonable disposition if possible.
Well, I know, is it, Barkley Fox, I think is the bill, the one that mandatory 1 year if you're caught with a weapon,
Yes.
a gun.
Yes, that's what it is.
Yeah,
Bartley Fox.
Barkley Fox. Goes back to the 70s.
I know.
How many convictions have there ever been? I don't think there's been any, or one, if anything at all.
No, I mean, I
And
get
that's
that.
a mandatory 1 year sentence. What I understand is the DA will always use that as a way of getting to confess or to give in on something else.
And that's another area, I'm glad you brought that up. That is an area that we need to be tough on people who don't have licenses to carry firearms, who have firearms, because those are the people hurting folks with guns. Those are
Right.
the ones, those are people who need to go to jail. You get caught with a gun, it's a mandatory minimum. If you don't have an LTC, it's a mandatory
Yeah.
minimum. And you start doing that, you're gonna get some of these gangbangers off the streets.
Well,
These
yeah.
people are buying guns out of out of trunks. They're not buying guns at, I don't know if
It's extremely
Cabela's
hard
still
to get a
sells them.
permit for a gun in Massachusetts.
As somebody with her LTC, it is very difficult. You have
Yeah.
to take a class.
And it's expensive.
It's expensive.
You gotta pay for the class, you gotta pay for the permit.
You have to renew it.
Renew it every year, it's $100, I think?
It's $100.
Yeah. So, I mean, if someone does all that, God, I mean, they should be allowed to, there should be no problem with them. But yet they're not prosecuting the people that don't do it.
No, and when we hear about these gun crimes, you very rarely hear that it was an unlawful gun owner. It's just everybody. There's a gun crime. It's a gun crime. It's
Yeah.
not unlawful versus lawful. And one of the things, and I don't know the answer. I was speaking to a legislator about it, Rep. Kate Campanelli, about it.
Oh, she was on a show a few weeks back.
Yeah, I was asking her, we talk about closing loopholes, which I'm in favor of with respect to people who shouldn't have guns, mental health issues, criminal records. And one of the things I was really interested and surprised to read about is that there is no federal requirement that every state send into the federal database
Yes.
information. So Massachusetts Criminal History Systems Board should be sending into the federal database all criminal convictions of
Right.
everybody in Massachusetts and anybody who's been admitted into a mental health institution. States are encouraged to do it, but not required. Now,
Right.
there's something that would make sense. And I don't know
Yes.
if Massachusetts has adopted a law that would require our state to do that. Now, that would be a good thing, right?
And then if they wanted to buy a gun locally, they would be in that database and you'd be able to check it out.
That's right. And then say, nope, this person has, if it were a federal requirement for every state, no, this guy has a domestic out of Tennessee, he can't have an LTC in Massachusetts. That's not even in place. You would think that is such common sense to require that, because when you do get your LTC, you have to call into the federal government, right? You have to call into the federal bureau there,
Yeah,
and they do your
Bureau of
background check.
Firearms and Alcohol,
Tobacco,
and
firearms.
ATF.
They do your background check. You get fingerprinted. It all, but what good is that database if there's no requirement that all
Right.
states send in relevant information?
And we hear about, the gun crimes, Chicago's got the most, and they got some of the strictest gun laws in the country.
London has a higher murder rate than New York City, and
Yeah.
they have stripped all their citizens, with the exception of very few instances. Very, very hard to get a gun permit in
Almost
London.
impossible.
They have a higher murder rate now since they took England basically took away their Second Amendment rights, what we'd call them here.
Yes.
In the mid-'80s, leading up to the '90s. It started with assault rifles, and then eventually it ended, they took away handguns and everything. They have a higher murder rate than New York City now.
Yeah, now see, that's the whole, I've always said, we had lower murder rates when everybody could carry a gun. Because you didn't know if the guy if somebody had a gun or not, so you weren't gonna take a chance.
That's right.
So,
You're not a soft target.
Right.
And that's another thing about our schools. You know,
Yeah.
we hear a lot about, I mean, gun control and school safety are, it's like apples and oranges in my mind. Why don't we have metal detectors in our schools?
Right.
I mean, you can't get on a plane, you can't enter a government building. All these elected officials have these bodyguards and state troopers around them, and everybody gets frisked, and you can't go into a courthouse without going through a metal detector.
Yeah.
These are children, these are our most precious assets, most vulnerable among us, and we don't have metal detectors at schools. That's a money issue, that's what people should be talking about, if you wanna make our schools safe.
And all the gun crimes in the schools have been guns that were taken illegally, including in Connecticut. He stole the gun from his mother.
And I think we need to crack down on people who don't have their weapons secured.
That's
So
a big factor.
that is a
There's
very
no
big
reason
issue.
that you can't get a good gun safe, secure your weapon. You have locks. I mean, well, there's technology now, I guess, that they can use, your hand is the one that releases the gun.
Yes, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. There's no reason why somebody who
Right.
has their LTC
And I can
should.
understand someone wanting to be able to have access at night. They want to protect if they're worried about that. But there can be technology to handle that. We're going to have to wrap it up.
Wow, that went
Yeah,
by really fast.
didn't it?
What else haven't we talked about? Should we talk about cuisine?
Yeah. We cover the gamut here.
Pretty much.
But, okay, you're up for election in November.
I am, yes.
No primary challenge.
No primary challenge.
Primary is the right day after Labor Day.
I know, that's gonna be a
Oh, God,
wild,
that's
that's gonna be a wild, wild day. Well, I am, you know, I am the lone Republican on the council.
Right.
Sometimes I feel like I need those wolf ears, you know, the ESPN desk, so I can howl. But you know, I work well with my colleagues, and
Yep.
yeah. So you know, I like being up there. I work really hard.
Are there other Republicans in other districts running?
There are a couple other Republicans running in other districts.
Well, hopefully you'll get, you know, one party system does not work.
It doesn't,
And we got that in Massachusetts. So,
with the exception of the governor.
except the government, that's
yeah.
only, that happens every now and then, it doesn't happen all the time.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. You know,
So,
it's
and you need a little more of a breakup. I'm not saying that take over the legislature, but you need more votes on the opposition so that not just everything goes through.
You need point counterpoint. You know,
Yeah.
up on the council, I'm the council talking about public safety, victims' rights, judicial accountability.
Yep.
And then I've got my colleagues talking about their issues, and, which is fine,
But you need a little backing for yourself, too. You
I
can't be the
do. I mean,
lone- You can't be the lone person up there.
I bark pretty loud up there when I need
Right.
to. I'm not afraid of confrontation, especially if it's something I'm very passionate
Right.
about. And, you know, I think it's important to have spirited debate. And as long as
Yeah.
you can back up what you're saying,
Exactly.
you know, and I go to work on the council, I do all my homework, I make my phone calls, I do my due diligence, and I do, as Bill Belichick said, I do my job.
There you go.
And I try not to play politics, I just do my job.
Well, thank you for coming in, Jim.
It was a
We have to have
pleasure.
you back again.
I would love to come back.
Okay. And our guest next week is going to be Peter and Alex Lee, who are hearing aid specialists. We're going to talk about, a lot of people have hearing problems and don't even realize they do. We're going to talk about that next week. And the week after, we have Tracy Lavoie.
Yes.
I said that right? She is a candidate for the 2nd Congressional District, which is the one we're in now. And she's going to be challenging our current Congressman, Mr. McGovern. So we'll see you next week.